Okay. Had some great discussion during the break. Looks like folks are processing what we're saying. And so we're ready now to move on to overcoming love busters. And let me go ahead and point out where we're at in your booklet. Understanding Love Busters, page 16 is what I'm looking at. 6 tips to overcome. And then rating, page 18. That's where we're headed, is page 18. So we'll be there in a few minutes. And that's the homework assignment. First one is put that love bank on your fridge and be aware of that and be thinking about it. And then the second one is to rate your love busters. Okay, so the key to a successful marriage, pretty simple really. Must learn to care for, i.e. listen to, be aware of, meet each other's needs. And protect each other, i.e. keep from hurting the other person or annoying the other person. Avoid making withdrawals, whatever you possibly can. So, Harley defines a love buster as a destructive marital habit, any repeated behavior of a spouse that causes the other to be unhappy in any way, i.e. withdraw love units. So, again, the book that deals with this in detail, which I highly recommend, this is not nearly as popular as His Needs, Her Needs, but it is a very helpful secondary book, protecting your marriage from habits that destroy romantic love, and you replace them with habits that are pleasing to your spouse. That's how you get to be compatible. Now, what do I do first? This is a mistake that I made when I first was doing marriage counseling. I used to focus in on, trying to figure out ways you could say I love you and doing nice things for your spouse and that kind of thing, which I thought was, certainly a good place to begin. But that's not really where you should begin. In fact, if you think of the love bucket, the love busters are the holes in the bucket. And before you focus in on trying to fill up a bucket with a bunch of holes in it, what's the first thing you want to do? Plug the holes, right? Then you can start making deposits in the love bank. So where do I begin first? You identify and stop the love busters, which are talked about there on page 16 through 18. And you have to recall and remember that the biggest danger to intimacy in a relationship is walls. What is passion? It is the free exchange of feelings in an atmosphere of trust. That's what passion is. When the trust breaks down, that's when the passion stops, because there are walls that get in the way of the free flow of feelings. So walls are your biggest danger. So one of the little quizzes that I've given you on page 12 is how to discern what degree you and your spouse are emotionally divorced from each other. And of course, when couples come for counseling, they're going to have an issue. So there's some degree of them having these walls up. And identifying those and being aware of them is absolutely critical if you're going to coach them through how to overcome this. So the first thing you want to do is stop doing the things that are creating the walls. Now, there is a parenting principle from Ephesians 6 and verse 4 that just hit me like a ton of bricks when I was thinking about this. What does Paul say about parenting? First thing he says is, provoke not your children to wrath. Well, that's a love buster. How do you provoke your children to wrath? Well, you over-discipline them for small offenses. You yell at them because you're frustrated about other things, and you take it out on the poor little kid. And the kid, ultimately can be provoked to wrath, really angry with their parents. They have a chip on their shoulder about mom and dad. So what does he say? First, he tells the dads especially, please make sure you don't have a bunch of love busters towards your kids. Don't do things to provoke them to wrath. Don't be abusive. And then after you make sure that you're careful in that regard, keep the communication lines open, you nurture them in the discipline and admonition of the Lord. So, if you are being abusive towards your kids, and then you get real calm and you start talking to them about the Bible and ways they ought to love the Lord, they're not going to be open to you. They're going to think, what kind of hypocrite are you? Right? They don't trust you. They're not going to listen. You put your arm around a rebellious teenager, they're going to pull away. You don't have a chance to nurture them because they're sporting a toot. So the first thing you need to do is avoid the provoking your children to wrath. Or in this vernacular, you want to avoid love busters so that you can nurture them. Does that make sense? So that's where you need to focus first. You need to focus first on getting rid of the holes in the love bucket, the things that are causing those holes. Again, these are practical applications of love and honor. And that's why this is all so biblical. Okay, first love buster, very common that folks need to be aware of and make sure they avoid, is an angry outburst. An angry outburst is when something is used as a way to punish or get back at the other party. Nothing wrong with a firm tone. I think sometimes that's appropriate, particularly in parenting. But, you might raise your voice to make a point. But yelling at the other party is something different altogether. This is done in harshness and creates disrespect. Yelling at another person is degrading. And you don't want to yell. My wife grew up in a home where it was just sort of the way they resolved conflict. They just yelled at each other all the time. The mom and dad yelled at each other. They eventually wound up getting divorced, which is not too surprising. And they yelled at the kids. And so when we were dating, we didn't have those issues. But once we got married and she's in that kind of emotional place, we started having differences. And she started yelling at me. I didn't grow up in a home like that. We don't yell at one another. What do you do? What happened to the soft-spoken woman that I married? Well, these old habits came back into play. And I finally had to tell her, I says, honey, I know this is a bad habit. And I know it's hard for you to break, but I feel really uncomfortable having children until you get rid of this yelling problem. And that really got her attention. By the way, Gail said you are more than welcome to use me as an example if it will help other people. So I have her permission to be sharing this story with you, okay? And she has masterfully overcome the problem she had coming from a yelling family. But if you come from a dysfunctional family, you tend to just repeat those patterns. That's all you know. So that's what you do. And it's just really important to be aware of some of those things. And if they are harmful and they don't help the marriage, they don't glorify God, you just commit to change your habits. Easier said than done, but it can be done. And you just need to help the other party to make sure that in our home, we don't yell at each other. I remember Allison, our youngest daughter, we were talking about this one day, and she came to my mom. She says, Mom, why do you yell at Daddy? And she goes, what are you talking about? I don't yell at Daddy. She goes, sure. Daddy, come to dinner. Well, that was different, right? Because that wasn't yelling at me. That was just trying to get my attention. All right, here's an example of an angry outburst. Job's wife. I think sometimes we're kind of hard on Job's wife because she had a lot of losses too, right? I mean, she was dealing with a tremendous amount. Her children, her friends, her fortune, her husband's health. But instead of giving him the support that he needed when everything else had been stripped away, what does she do? She says, why don't you just curse God and die? Man, that must have gone through the core of Job's soul when the one person that he'd hoped he could count on turned on him as well. Man, that must have been a feeling of loneliness. And I can guarantee you that that was not said in a real sweet voice, right? So it's an angry outburst. And at different times, people fall into that trap. The Bible says, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to what? Slow to wrath. Why? Because you don't want to have angry outbursts. Proverbs, he who is quick-tempered acts foolishly. Someone says, you know, nobody wants your temper, so keep it to yourself. You're apt to say things later that you will regret. Then there's Proverbs 12:18. There is one who speaks like the piercing of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes healing. So, choose your words carefully, for later you may have to eat them, right? Most of the time, this is just a bad habit. There are so many proverbs about, you know, he that restraineth his lips is wise. That's so true, particularly when you're dealing from a place of hurt feelings. Okay, the next love buster, very common, and that is disrespectful judgments. No one likes a caustic critic. Remember, that's one of the things that severs emotional bonds, especially if the other person is being put down sarcastically, where you try to impose your values on the other person. And if you don't agree with my value judgment, then somehow or other you're subhuman. Let me give you an example. Husband comes up with a tie that he wants to wear with a shirt, and it clashes. And the wife walks up and says, if you had any taste, you'd know that tie doesn't go well together with that shirt. You're getting ready to go to worship service, and suddenly you don't have any taste. How about, you know, honey, do you think maybe this tie would go better? Oh, okay, yeah, I'll try that. Yeah, that does go better. I mean, you could have dealt with that without putting the other person down and causing a wall to go up. Or worse, a hurt that you tend to nurse and hold a grudge. Be careful. These things are viewed as rude, arrogant, and disrespectful. Here's another. If you were really normal, you'd understand why you don't squeeze the toothpaste from the middle, but from the bottom. Well, there's a lot of those kind of things couples have to adjust to. But you ought to be able to talk about it without acting like the person who had a different habit about the toothpaste is not normal like you, right? Or how about this? Well, if it wasn't for your mother, you wouldn't feel that way. Or you wouldn't have that hang up if it wasn't for the family you came from. Whoa, those are fighting words. Those are hurtful words. Put down somebody's mom? It's not going to go over very well. How about just say, you know what, we have different things from our families, we need to blend them together. What do you say if in our family, as a married couple, we do this way? Is that all right with you? Maybe different from the way you grew up, but I'd really like it if we could do this. Be a big deposit in the love bank. What do you say? See, you can have discussions with folks. You want to have respectful persuasion. With all due respect, that's the problem with our politics today. Is, you know, people are just disrespectfully calling each other names and just antagonizing the other person instead of having respectful discussions. One of the things that people so admired about Charlie Kirk is one person said the one word that he thought of that described Charlie Kirk, who was recently assassinated, was he was gracious. He really was. If you've ever listened to him debate folks that he disagreed with, he was always respectful. He never called anybody's names. He never got mad, never questioned their motives. I thought, what a great example this is as far as how Christians should talk to other people as we speak the truth in love. And that's why, you know, he's really been so almost universally admired. Notice I said almost. Because his enemies want to take him out of context and discredit his message because they don't want to deal with the message. But at any rate, you need to avoid disrespectful judgment. James says, do not speak evil of one another. Brethren, there is one lawgiver who is able to destroy. Who are you to judge one another? Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't make judgments. John 7 and verse 24 says, judge righteous judgments, not according to appearances. So we're commanded to make judgments, but we can do so righteously. We can do so respectfully. We can do so without forcing our opinion on someone else. Remember, 1 Corinthians 13:5 says, love does not insist on its own way. So I repeat, work on respectful persuasion, not put-downs. And don't do what so many couples do, is they can't argue very well, and so they just shut down the communication. And avoidance of communication is one of the precursors of divorce. So you need to learn to discuss anything and to do so respectfully, without angry outbursts, and without putting the other person down. All right, the next is annoying behaviors. And I get a big kick out of this category. This is doing something that aggravates the other person. Here we got one, Proverbs 27:14. If someone blesses his friend with a loud voice early in the morning, it will be taken as a curse. You know, I don't know what it is. I think God has a sense of humor, but morning doves and night owls tend to marry one another. And so, you know, one person is just gearing up at night and having fun, and the other person's eyes are half masked and wants to go to bed. Then that same person thinks they are morally superior to the person who wants to sleep in because they stayed up late, and say, come on, arise, roll that beautiful bean, you know, and you're on, oh, you know, it's Saturday morning, let me get some rest, you know. And so if you're that way, if you're a morning dove, be respectful of the night owl and vice versa. You know, you're kind of pre-wired that way. I don't think those things are things that can change very well, but you can respect each other's best hours of the day based on kind of, you know, where they're coming from in their, you know, body's metabolism. So here, Solomon, 3,000 years ago, remember, he's got a harem of 1,000 women. And he says, I don't know whether he was a night owl or not, but he's talking about being considerate of the other person and the fact that maybe they want to sleep in a little bit. Avoid annoying behaviors. What are some other examples of annoying behaviors? Behaviors repeated without much thought that bother your spouse. Doing something that irritates the other party consistently. It's not a problem if this happens just once in a while. But if this is an ongoing thing you have to deal with, it can be a real irritant. Like dog-earing the pages of someone's books. Or maybe you always run late and your spouse wants to be early. Boy, that can be really irritating. How about maybe table manners? Eating with your mouth open, poor posture, tapping your fingers, fidgeting constantly, and driving your poor spouse crazy because of the fidgeting. How about one fella who fell asleep on the couch when he came home from work? He was a blue-collar worker. He woke up early, worked hard. He'd come home about 4, and he frequently would fall on the couch, fall asleep. His wife would come home, and he'd be snoring there on the couch with his mouth wide open. And she found that not a very pleasant sight. And so he told me, he said, do you mean I'm laying there taking a nap in my own house and I'm making withdrawals from the love bank because I got my mouth open and I'm snoring when I'm sleeping? I go, that's exactly what I'm saying. He goes, how fair is that? I go, I don't know. Nobody said life was fair. But you need to watch the love bank. Could you go upstairs and sleep upstairs if you want to take a little nap so when your wife comes home she doesn't have to see it? He goes, yeah, I guess so. I said, okay, problem solved. But that was not a pretty sight to his wife, and he needed to be aware of that. One of the things that's really funny about this subject is that women tend to find men more annoying than men find women. This is almost true universally. And so it's kind of funny when you bring this up in seminars, the women say, well, that's because men are more annoying. And the men say, no, that's because we're more tolerant and understanding and not so easily bugged by things that bother women. You know what? I'm not going to even weigh into that here in a mixed audience as to, you know, who's right about that. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of things that men do annoy women. So, A lot of people that are the men want to say, just get over it. Shouldn't bother you. Don't let it bother you. It's a lot easier for you to establish a new habit and change out of respect and consideration for your spouse than it is for them to just not have a visceral response to something that they don't like. So a lot of times the solutions are pretty simple, like take a nap upstairs instead of on the couch, right? Make a commitment to be considerate and try to avoid annoying behaviors like leaving your whiskers in the sink for your wife to pick up after you, right? So these things can be an issue in marriages, and if you'll just be thoughtful and think about it, usually they're not that hard to fix. But what about selfish demands? Demands choke out love. You can have a slave or a lover, but you can't have both. Threats, lectures, manipulation, which builds resentment and causes the other party discomfort, is what's a selfish demand is all about. Communicating to your spouse, commanding your spouse to do things that benefit you at your spouse's expense with implied threat of punishment if you refuse, will absolutely destroy romantic love. It's also very important that you remember that you're both adults. You have this adult-to-adult dyad versus talking down to your spouse and you become the parent. Sometimes moms are busy raising their kids and talking to their kids, and then their husband comes home and she starts talking to him like he's one of the kids. That's not a good thing. And sometimes parents, can, forget to treat their spouse different than the kids, because talking to a 5-year-old is not the same as talking to an adult, right? And so try to be very careful about selfish demands. One example in the Bible, in Judges 16, 15, and 16, is Delilah pressured Samson daily, the Bible says, until his soul was vexed. Now, why he continued to sleep with Delilah after she continued to prove over and over again that she was not trustworthy is beyond me. Sam and I were talking about this. Dumb. I have this sermon I preach called Samson, Strong but Stupid. And the way he dealt with Delilah was really, really unwise, right? Selfish demand. She just wanted to figure out his secrets so she could get paid for delivering her not her husband, I don't think they were married, but her boyfriend up to the Philistines. Philippians 2, 3 through 4. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition. Let each of you look not only for your own interest, but also for the interest of others. So ask how the other party would feel before moving forward. As a preacher, I sometimes will get opportunities to move somewhere. I'm not going to just say, hey, we're moving to California, without talking to my wife about it first. What are your thoughts about this, right? Obviously, you need to function as a team. And another big love buster is honesty. Marriage demands radical honesty. And this is really serious because when you catch your spouse in a lie, it breaks down trust. And any good relationship is based on trust. Someone has said that trust goes out in buckets, but it comes back in drops. It takes time to rebuild trust. And so even if you're going to get in trouble kind of for telling your spouse what you did or whatever, it's best to take the heat than it is to cover it up and then later on be caught in the cover-up. Cover-up's always worse than the original deed. It is so important to be radically honest. And it is a major love buster. Who wants to live with a liar? The key is to reveal to your spouse your thoughts, feelings, habits, likes, dislikes, personal history, daily activities, and plans for the future. Anything that they really have the right to know. I remember years ago, it was a young Christian couple, and I knew them both well. And the wife comes to me after they'd only been married a couple of weeks and said, you know, my marriage is really on the rocks. I go, really? You guys should still be in your honeymoon. She goes, my honeymoon was terrible. My wedding night was awful. I go, what happened? Because I was at the wedding. Everything seemed like it was so good. She said, well, on our wedding night, my husband announced that we weren't having children. And I had assumed that we were going to get married and have kids. We didn't talk about how many, and she said, you should have told me this. You lied to me. And he goes, no, I didn't lie to you. I never said that I wanted kids, and now I'm backpedaling. Because I had a bad relationship with my brother, and there's lots of other issues, and I don't want to have kids. So I guess a married couple might decide not to have children. I think they're giving up a great blessing if they do. I don't understand that myself. It's not very wise. But if they choose that, that's, I guess, their choice. But it's unfair to hide that when you're dating, and then that's the bombshell that you announce on your wedding night. Because you just assume that marriage is going to involve children. And so she said, why didn't you tell me this sooner? He goes, because I was afraid if I did, you wouldn't marry me. Well, that made her feel even worse. So I was manipulated into this. Marriage didn't last long, and this Christian couple wound up divorcing. There was a violation of trust from the beginning. It was a deception. There was information that she had the right to know before she said, I do. And so you're a couple. You're working together. Don't keep things from your spouse that they have the right to know. Jacob, of course, was deceived by Isaac in his blindness. And interestingly enough, Jacob later was deceived in the wedding tent, the darkness of the wedding tent. And he kind of got what came to him. You know, what goes around comes around. Deception is never, ever acceptable. Deception is the tool of Satan. And so even though you're trying to do good, don't do evil that good may come, Paul says. Therefore, put away all lying. Each one speak the truth in love, Ephesians 5:25. Colossians 3:9-10. Do not lie to one another. These, it must have still been a problem among early Christians. They were liars before they became Christians, and he says, stop it. And this is a verse you need to have your children memorize, your grandchildren. Lying is an abomination to Jehovah, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. So important. So when your child confesses they did something they shouldn't have done, commend them for being upfront and coming clean and being honest, because honesty is a delight unto Jehovah. And then this next one is independent behavior. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood. Khalil Gibran said, the Arabic poet, he said, let there be spaces in your togetherness. And that's true. You need to allow some individuality. But the definition here is the conduct of one spouse that is conceived and executed as if the other spouse did not even exist. I mean, some level of independence is okay, but not if major decisions are made without the other spouse being considered. We're not talking about unhealthy dependency here, like you're a clinging vine. But we are talking about working together in a cooperative partnership. The key is interdependent behavior where the partners nurture and protect one another, and you try to avoid something that's going to make the other party really unhappy. Again, to go back to the other example, I know of a preacher who got a job offer and negotiated everything and then just came home and announced to his wife they were moving. And she wasn't even considered. There were a lot of things about the kids and about the change that he needed to think through, but no, he was just going to do it on his own. That's not being the head of the house. That, not being a servant leader. I mean, that is really being more of a dictator. This is the opposite of a cooperative partnership. Remember, so they are no longer two but one, therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate. So you need to function together, not just as one in the flesh, but one emotionally and spiritually and, if possible, even mentally. So here are these love busters. These are the holes in the love bucket. These have to be avoided at all cost. And you need to make sure that you eradicate those from your marriage as soon as possible. So, when you have love busters that go unchecked, romantic love is the victim. Every time. You're not going to want to be amorous towards somebody who's yelling at you and has angry outbursts and who creates these walls. It's really interesting how many men especially find themselves hating the wall between them and their spouse and the lack of passion in their relationship. And it's a wall that they built by their own insensitivity and their own love busters. They built up the wall to protect themselves from you. How ironic is that? You take a vow at the altar to protect your spouse, be the provider and the pilot and the protector. And yet later on, the wife has to protect herself from her own husband. That's really sad. Love deposits will not be received when the walls are up. We'll talk more about this Sunday night when we talk about successful quarreling. And be careful, because a few major withdrawals can undo scores of prior deposits. In fact, oftentimes it's 20 to 1. One major blunder, one name call, one angry outburst takes 20 positive deposits to make up for one really bad appropriate statement. So how do you overcome this? With a lot of prayer and patience. First of all, be committed and yet have patience, as I indicated. It takes time. And try not to do 2 or 3 of these at a time. Focus on the one that's the most damaging until you get that under control, and then work on a secondary one. Otherwise, it's just too overwhelming. Try to identify the why. What is it that triggers this in you? What triggers the angry outburst? Why is this so hard for you? And the more you can do that, the more you can commit this to prayer. And try to avoid triggers, things that kind of set you off. And if you can avoid those triggers, then by all means, do so. And develop alternative behaviors. I like to call these righteous substitutes. So maybe you're somebody who's going like this all the time. You just tend to fidget. Well, that's unconscious. You don't do it on purpose. But maybe instead of doing that with your fingers, maybe if it bothers your spouse, you just get one of those stress balls. And you do that instead of do this. Problem solved. Ask your mate, should be asked. Ask your mate for a weekly evaluation. Don't give up. You may think you're doing great, but you may be subconsciously doing stuff you weren't even aware of. So at least once a week, talk about it, reevaluate, and help each other overcome whatever these love busters might be. And by all means, marriage is a spiritual covenant. Pray together privately and as a couple. And by the way, husbands, let your wife pray in your presence. I love to hear my wife pray. If your wife can teach you at home and talk about the Bible with you, she can certainly pray with you. Now, in churches of Christ, because the men lead the prayer in public service, as they should, women often feel uncomfortable praying in front of others. They shouldn't. In private, in the family devotional setting, when a husband and wife are in the privacy of their home, they need to pray together. And you need to hear each other pray together. Very, very powerful and helpful. So, what is the key? You both must communicate clearly without being defensive, be honest, and use these Rate Your Mate forms on page 18 that we started off with. And each spouse must really listen and develop new habits. Both parties can learn to care for and protect each other in practical ways. So, let's turn to page 18. You rate his love busters and rate her love busters. And you do it on a scale of 1 to 5. And enter a 1 before the love buster that causes you the greatest unhappiness, and 2 before the one that causes the greatest unhappiness, and so on. And in some cases, people just put a line through it, or a 0, because I don't have any problem with dishonesty. We're always honest with one another. Great. Cross that out. You don't have to worry about that. But if there's any of these that periodically come up, discuss them. Now, if you just can't discuss them, that's where you need a coach. We need a third party to help you talk through this so you can understand each other better. But it is amazing how once you plug up the holes in the love bucket, then you're ready to start meeting each other's needs and really filling up that love bank. And meeting each other's needs is what we'll talk about in our Bible class. Okay, we've got a few minutes. Any thoughts or questions? You guys see the value of walking somebody through this and helping them with it? Remember, you start eliminating the love busters first. By the way, if this has been going on for a while, even if you start eliminating the love busters, you've still got past hurts that have to be dealt with. Things maybe that haven't been talked about and forgiven. And that's what we'll talk about on Sunday night. I really think that the words "I forgive you" in the long run are often more important in a marriage than even the words "I love you." Because a good marriage is simply made up of two forgivers who give each other grace and love each other in spite of our weaknesses. So we'll talk about that on Sunday night. It's very important, and that's how you help a couple work through this so they can have romantic love be reborn. Okay. Any questions? Any thoughts about this? It makes sense? If you want more detail, you can read Harley's book on overcoming love busters, where he goes into all these things in great detail. But you take the Bible and these verses and these biblical principles plus this paradigm, and you have something that is really useful to either save or enrich a marriage in a great way. Last chance. It's only quarter till. We're not even up with our time. Anybody got any thoughts? Okay. You've really been paying great attention. Do you have a thought? No, I put her on the spot. Sorry, didn't mean to embarrass you. See, that was probably a love buster right there. I should have been more thoughtful. Please forgive me. Okay, let's turn it over to David, and we'll have some closing remarks and closing prayer or song, right?
Kim will close us out. Yeah.
Okay, brother, go ahead. I'm done.
Turn to number 100.